Hello, today I'd like to talk a little bit about chilies and what you should, or more to the point, what you shouldn't be doing at this time of year. Chilies are very new to a lot of people, and it's one of those crops that's almost become scary. Some of the magazines and on the internet you see that you have to treat them in such a delicate way, special fertilisers, careful with germination, and they make them out to actually be an awful lot harder than they are. I've been growing chilies now for just over 20 years. I wouldn't say I'm an expert. To be an expert at anything I think takes at least 2 lifetimes. But I do think I know one or two bits about them. And as I say, I personally think they're an awful lot easier than tomatoes, for instance. Um, and tomatoes, there's a lot more fiddling around with them, side shooting and bits and pieces like that. And really, with chilies, you can just let them get on. Um, One of the hardest things, or can be one of the hardest things, is germination. Chilies do need a good, constant, steady temperature for germination. Now, all these plants in here were started mid-February. We put them onto heat. The seed was put onto heat, and we run our prop bed for the chilies at about 75 Fahrenheit, which is 24 Celsius-ish. And you expect germination in about a week to 10 days. I've seen various potions for aiding germination, but in reality, as I say, I think the most important thing is that you have a good, steady heat. So from that point of view, if you're going to grow lots of chilies, and tomatoes and aubergines as well, I would personally spend my money on a decent propagator rather than any magic potion that may or may not work. Um, from then, the seedlings were pricked out. We pricked those out. It was about the beginning of March, I think, about the first week of March. This is where they differ slightly from tomatoes, and this is something that a lot of people do make a mistake with, and particularly people who start them too early and let the seedlings get quite leggy. They then try and bury the seedling deep, which with tomatoes you can get away with because they will actually stem root. But with chilies, they don't like stem rooting. So one of the most important things is when you prick them out, to prick them out to the level that they've grown from, germinated at, so you're not burying them too deep. From then, they need to be grown on at a temperature of around 65 to 70 Fahrenheit, which in new money is about 18 degrees, something like that, 18 Celsius. And we left them in module trays for about a month, just let them get on with it growing, keeping them on the moister side of dry, so not too soggy, but just ticking over. When the plants got to about 2 inches, which is sort of 5 centimetres in height, we then pot them up into a 7 centimetre pot. Temperature can drop down now a little bit more, but if you can keep them at that temperature, that's ideal. They keep on growing on very, very nicely. From then, we actually planted these out into this tunnel the beginning of May. So they were in the 7 centimetre pots for a good nearly a good 6 weeks or so. These went into our own growing medium. This is another thing I think with chilies and tomatoes as well, is so many people spend an awful lot of time once they've actually put the plants into the compost of then doing lots of liquid feeding and bits and pieces like that. Personally, I advocate that if you spend a bit more money on your compost in the first place and get a good quality growing medium, you don't need to spend all this time liquid feeding, etc. I won't liquid feed these at all throughout the season. I won't feed them at all throughout the season. So from then on, they've been in this tunnel. This tunnel isn't heated, and April this year was a very, very good year. So from that point of view, they were in a heated greenhouse, but we weren't calling for heat. But when we moved them into here, we had a sudden shock of a frost. And that frost actually came overnight, about a week after they'd been potted up. And we had frost on the tunnel skin inside as well. No damage whatsoever to these, a little bit of damage on the tomatoes, so it's interesting once again to note that this plant that is supposedly so hard to grow actually put up with more than a lot of our tomatoes. So since then, what have I done? Not an awful lot really. Put a cane in, started tying in. I won't do any side shooting whatsoever. They don't need side shooting. They sort themselves out in that regard, and obviously you're trying to grow a bush plant anyway. Keeping an eye out for flower, and they soon start flowering. Some of the varieties, the early varieties like Hot Wax, they've already put out a flower or two. Keeping an eye out for aphids. We spray in here once a week with a garlic and citrus solution, our plant defence, and that keeps away all the bugs and nasties. We use it on all our greenhouse crops, and a spray once a week basically keeps everything clean, no problems there. Watering wise, that's another one, and I suppose I ought to go back to the container as well. A lot of people think that I grow in quite a large container, particularly for some of the smaller varieties, like the Chinenses, the Naga-Marich, the Bucholukias, that sort of thing. I actually tend to use, well, I do use the same container for everything. So whether it's one of the big monster plants like the Bacatum Christmas Bell, which will easily do sort of 3-4 feet, or some of the larger annum varieties like Pinocchio's Nose, which is a big KN, and once again that'll do 3 or 4 feet. That's in a 12-litre pot, and so are the smaller varieties. Once again, I think if you get your watering right, container size doesn't matter so much as many think. That's why I grow in the same size pot for my chilies and my tomatoes, greenhouse courgettes, and when we get the cucumbers in next week, they'll be in them as well. Same container, same compost, everything. So really that is about all you need to be doing at the moment, is just tying in, keeping a lookout for bugs and nasties, watering as and when required. This one is plenty wet enough, if I can find one that isn't. This one is a little bit dry, you can see the compost is a bit dusty on top. That will get a drink later on this afternoon. Just after lunch, I prefer to water all my greenhouse bits and pieces after lunch. It tends to mean that they don't get a cold shock in the morning, and the compost isn't wet, so you're not getting a cold temperature overnight as well. So a sort of lunchtime 1 o'clock-ish water is what we do in here. That one I have a water, and we'll literally just spot water through, and that will be about it. So from the amateur point of view, that is really all you need to be doing at this time of year, is just letting them get on with it and not fiddling around with them, because they are a very, very easy crop to grow. But one thing I would like to show you is how we save seed. And these are a couple of chilies that have been put to bed already in a tent. I'll drag one out. Chilies are notoriously good at cross-pollinating, so it is absolutely impossible to try and save seed from chilies that have been grown close together unless you keep every insect away from them. And that's why we build these tents and put an individual variety, or put a couple of plants of one individual variety in each tent. Obviously the other important thing is, even at this time of the year, before they went into the tents, we needed to check them over to see that there wasn't any flower whatsoever open, because we can't even risk a single fruit being pollinated by another. But that's something that you can get into if you want to. It's quite good fun, but obviously for the amateur, probably something you don't really need to worry about too much. If you don't do this, and you actually let them cross-pollinate and you save the fruits, you'll tend to find that the fruit will stay semi-true to type for a couple of years. The Chinense varieties, and that's things like the Bucholukia, Naga-Marich, tend to hang on another year before they really go off the rails. But obviously you get some very interesting things going on, so it is quite a good fun thing to do as well, to just let them get on with it, cross-pollinate, save some seed, and sow those next year. But as we are selling specific varieties of seed, it's important for us to make sure that they are exactly what we sell, and that's why we go to all this effort.